It was 3:12 a.m. when Jake Thompson woke to the shrill, ear-piercing scream of his smoke alarm. His heart pounded as he stumbled out of bed, half-dazed. Convine said his house was on fire. But there were no flames, no smoke, just darkness. The power was out again. He groaned and rubbed his face. This had been the fourth blackout that month, and he knew exactly what would happen next. His notoriously petty HOA president, Linda Harper, would come storming over to complain. But Jake wasn't about to suffer through another cold, sleepless night. He trudged to his garage, yanked the cord on his old generator, and, like a faithful dog, it roared to life. Within minutes, his house was aglow with warm light. The fridge hummed back to life, and the faint sound of his TV returned, barely audible over the distant sound of his neighbors' groans and curses. 15 minutes later, just as predicted, Linda appeared on his doorstep, dressed in her usual pastel-colored power suit and armed with a clipboard. She banged on his door like she was conducting a police raid. "Jake," she barked. "This is completely unacceptable." He opened the door, clutching a mug of coffee, still half asleep. "Linda, it's 3:30 a.m. That generator is against HOA noise ordinances," she snapped. "It's quieter than my neighbor's kid practicing drums in the garage," Jake muttered. "I'm just trying to keep my food from spoiling." "You know the rules." Linda pointed dramatically toward his yard, as if summoning HOA spirits to strike him down. "Generators are unsightly and disruptive to neighborhood peace." "I'm sorry, Linda," Jake said with exaggerated politeness, "but I'm not about to sit in the dark just because you don't like the sound of progress." He started to close the door. "You think you're clever," Linda's voice rose sharply. "You think I won't do something about this?" "I think you should go home," Jake said, shutting the door firmly. The next morning, Jake stepped outside and realized his generator was missing. He stared at the empty space in disbelief, then spotted Linda across the street, sipping coffee on her porch with a smug grin. He stormed over. "You took my generator," Jake growled. "I confiscated it," Linda said proudly. "It's being held in my garage until you comply with HOA policies. You can't just steal my stuff." "It's not stealing," Linda insisted. "It's enforcement." Fuming, Jake turned back toward his house when something strange caught his eye: a black van parked at the corner of the block. The engine idled, and two men in dark suits sat inside, staring directly at his home. Jake blinked. The men didn't move. That evening, Jake ventured to the alley behind his house, curiosity gnawing at him. He noticed a thick black cable running from a concealed junction box right to where his generator had been. The cable had been severed when Linda yanked it away. Stranger still, the junction box had a blinking red light on it labeled Alert System Failure. "What the hell?" Jake muttered. Before he could investigate further, footsteps crunched behind him. He turned just in time to see three men in dark suits storming his yard. One of them flashed a badge. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the man barked. "Step back from the equipment." Jake froze. "What? You just compromised an active surveillance operation," the agent growled. "You have no idea what you've done." "Wait, hold on," Jake stammered. "What are you talking about?" "Your generator," the agent barked. "It was powering a critical FBI surveillance station, one monitoring a dangerous suspect right here in your neighborhood. Without that power," the agent gestured toward a laptop screen where several blackout surveillance feeds blinked and stuttered. "We lost everything." "You're kidding me," Jake muttered. "We don't kid," the agent snapped. "We need that generator back. Now." Linda's smug face flashed in Jake's mind. "Oh," he said slowly. "This is about to get interesting." Two agents followed him as he marched toward Linda's house. Jake banged on her door, this time harder than she had on his. Linda answered with her usual self-satisfied smile. "Back so soon?" she asked. "I need my generator back," Jake demanded. "Oh," Linda feigned surprise. "Decided to respect the rules, have you?" "It's not about the rules," Jake said. "That generator was powering something important." "Oh, please," Linda scoffed. "I know you're making this up." "That generator," Jake emphasized, "was connected to an FBI surveillance station." For a moment, Linda's smug expression faltered, but only for a moment. "I don't believe you," she said. "You're just trying to scare me." "I'm not trying to scare you," Jake said. "They are." He stepped aside, revealing the two FBI agents standing behind him. One of them wore a bulletproof vest, The other held a tablet displaying some intimidating-looking surveillance maps. Linda's face paled. "You've interfered with a federal investigation," one agent warned. "We need that equipment." Immediately, Linda's mouth flapped like a fish out of water. Two was just. "Where's the generator?" the agent demanded. Linda swallowed hard. "In my garage." Moments later, the agents wheeled the generator out, firing it back up and restoring power to their surveillance system. Jake couldn't resist giving Linda a satisfied grin as they passed her by. "You're in big trouble," one agent warned Linda before following Jake back to his house. Once things were restored, the lead agent turned to Jake. "We'll need you to keep that generator running for the next few days. The target we're tracking is dangerous, and this surveillance station is critical." "Sure," Jake said. "But if Linda comes back, can I call you guys for backup?" The agent smirked. "You won't need to. We'll be watching her too." Now Jake couldn't help but laugh. The generator rumbled on, the neighborhood lights flickered back to life, and Jake sat back with a cold beer, savoring the VY Tory. Across the street, Linda sulked on her porch, no longer so smug. Jake raised his bottle in a mock toast. "Cheers, Linda," he muttered. The following morning, Jake sat on his porch, sipping coffee and replaying the chaotic events from the night before. He still couldn't believe if this ordinary backup generator had been quietly powering an FBI surveillance hub. The agents had been tight-lipped about their target, but Jake gathered enough from their panicked whispers to know it was serious. They were watching someone dangerous, and thanks to Linda's meddling, that operation had nearly gone up in smoke. Jake grinned at the thought of Linda's stunned face when the FBI agents showed up on her doorstep. It was a rare VY Tory, but he suspected Linda wasn't done. Sure enough, just before noon, Linda stormed down the street, clipboard in hand, and a furious scowl etched across her face. Jake barely had time to stand before she was barking accusations. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat. "Running some ridiculous con to make me look bad." "Oh, you don't need my help for that," Jake shot back, enjoying himself. The FBI seemed pretty clear about whose fault it was. Linda's eyes narrowed. "Don't act like you're innocent. I don't believe for 1 second that generator story. You're up to something." "Yeah," Jake said dryly. "I'm secretly running a spy ring out of my garage." "Very convincing." "You laugh now," Linda snapped. "But I know you're hiding something." Before Jake could respond, two of his neighbors, both of whom had suffered through the blackout, joined them. Mr. Taylor, an elderly man notorious for his obsession with HOA bylaws, crossed his arms tightly over his chest. "Linda, Mr. Taylor said sharply, "You've gone too far this time. Stealing someone's property? Sabotaging the power? You're out of control." "Oh, please," Linda scoffed. "I was enforcing community guidelines." "You nearly ruined a federal investigation." Mrs. Henderson, the sweet but no-nonsense woman from 2 houses down, chimed in. "This isn't just about rules anymore. You're dangerous." Linda's face turned red. "I am the president of this HOA, and I was doing what's best for this community." "By cutting off power to a government sting operation?" Jake asked with a smirk. "Yeah, you're a real hero." The argument escalated as more neighbors gathered. Linda's voice grew louder and shriller as she defended herself, but the more she talked, the less support she had. Jake noticed something unusual, though. Linda wasn't just defending her actions, she was deflecting. She kept accusing Jake of being a threat to the neighborhood, repeating it over and over as if hoping to convince everyone. That evening, Jake's suspicions deepened when he noticed 2 more black SUVs parked down the street. The FBI was still there, still watching something or someone close by. Curious, he approached one of the agents stationed in the alley. The agent, clearly frustrated, warned him to stay out of their way. But just before turning him away, the agent let something slip. "We had eyes on the suspect for weeks," the agent muttered. "Now we're scrambling to recover ground. Whatever you do, don't talk to Linda." That last line stuck with Jake. Don't talk to Linda. What did that mean? The FBI wasn't watching his house anymore, they were watching hers. Determined to get answers, Jake spent the next day watching Linda's house closely. He noticed that Linda's son, Todd, kept stepping outside to talk to someone on his phone, pacing nervously along the sidewalk. Todd was hardly a criminal mastermind, was a scrawny college dropout who spent most of his time playing video games, but something about his behavior seemed off. Later that night, Jake spotted Linda sneaking out to her car, carrying a suspiciously heavy-looking box. He quietly followed her down the street, watching as she handed the box off to someone waiting in the shadows behind Mr. Henderson's shed. The figure was a short, older man, Mr. Henderson himself. Jake's stomach turned. The man had always seemed harmless, like the kind of guy who spent his afternoons trimming hedges and polishing lawn gnomes. But something about the way he took that box, glancing anxiously toward the parked FBI vans, told Jake this wasn't just some innocent neighborly errand. The following morning, Jake was awakened by a loud knock. He opened the door to find Linda standing on his porch, smiling smugly. "I just wanted to warn you," she said sweetly. "The HOA board is meeting this evening to discuss your suspicious behavior. It seems some of our residents are concerned about your connection to all this FBI nonsense." "You're kidding," Jake said, dumbfounded. "You're trying to blame me?" Linda's grin widened. "I warned you not to mess with me." Jake spent the rest of the day stewing in frustration. Something was seriously wrong, and Linda knew more than she was letting on. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Jake reached out to one of the agents stationed in the alley. This time, the agent was more willing to talk. "We're not just watching Henderson," the agent explained. "We've been intercepting messages linked to an arms trafficking ring. Henderson's been relaying coded messages most likely without even realizing it." Jake's eyes widened. "How?" "His landline," the agent replied. "Someone's been feeding him numbers to call fake charity hotlines, political surveys, that kind of thing. Every time he dials those numbers, he's unknowingly passing messages to the traffickers." "That's actually kind of brilliant," Jake muttered. "But what's Linda got to do with it?" The agent frowned. "We think Linda's been feeding Henderson those numbers without knowing what they mean. She's obsessed with tracking everyone in the neighborhood, always demanding call logs, email lists, and attendance sheets. We believe someone slipped those coded numbers into her demands." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. Linda, in her relentless quest for control, had accidentally become a cog in an illegal arms network. Worse still, her constant power plays were getting in the way of the FBI's efforts to stop it. Later that night, during the HOA meeting, Linda stood before the residents and gave a long-winded speech about preserving neighborhood order. She accused Jake of conspiring with dangerous people, claiming he had secretly aided the blackout to disrupt the FBI's operation. Jake was about to speak up when he noticed Todd slipping out the back door of the meeting hall. Jake followed Todd into the dark, trailing him to Mr. Henderson's house. Todd knocked twice, paused, then knocked again, some kind of signal. Jake ducked behind a bush and watched as Mr. Henderson opened the door and handed Todd a manila envelope stuffed with cash. Just as Jake reached for his phone, blue and red lights flooded the street. FBI agents swarmed the house, guns drawn. Todd tried to run but tripped over a garden hose and sprawled face-first on the pavement. Henderson was cuffed moments later. Linda, watching from the crowd, paled as agents swarmed her home as well. In the chaos, one agent approached Jake. "You might want to stay inside for a while," the agent warned. "Things are going to get messy." "Trust me," Jake said, unable to stop himself from smiling. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." Jake paced back and forth in his living room, still replaying the chaotic events from earlier. The FBI had swarmed the neighborhood, cuffing Todd and Mr. Henderson while Linda stood frozen on her porch, speechless for once in her life. The entire scene should have felt like a VY Tory, but something nagged at Jake. The agents seemed satisfied with their arrests, yet they hadn't recovered the key EVY Denke they'd been searching for. And Jake had a feeling Linda still had a role to play in all of this. Later that evening, curiosity dragged him outside. The FBI had packed up their mobile station and pulled their vans back, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something important was still unresolved. Across the street, Linda was in her driveway, hurriedly stacking boxes into her car. Jake squinted, noticing that one of the boxes bore the same marking he'd seen on the package Linda had handed to Henderson the night before. His stomach twisted. Whatever Linda was up to, she hadn't learned her lesson, and that meant she still had something the FBI needed. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Jake marched across the street. Linda froze mid-box toss when she saw him. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I could ask you the same thing," Jake shot back. "Packing up pretty fast, aren't you?" "Not that it's any of your business," Linda sneered, "but I'm cleaning out my garage." Jake's eyes drifted to the corner of her garage, where his old generator still sat, half buried under piles of junk. Then he noticed something else: a black duffel bag tucked beneath a blanket. The bag was bulky, too heavy to be ordinary junk. Jake's gut twisted. "You're running again," Jake muttered. Linda's face twisted in an exaggerated scoff. "Oh, please. What could I possibly have to run from?" "You tell me," Jake shot back. "Because the FBI isn't done with you yet. They're still looking for something." Linda's smug smile faltered for just a second, and that's when Jake knew. Whatever was in that duffel bag was exactly what the FBI was after. "Hand it over, Linda," Jake warned. "You're insane," Linda hissed, clutching the bag. "You don't know what you're talking about. You've been playing messenger for a criminal network without even knowing it," Jake said. "You gave Todd numbers to pass along. You've handed Henderson packages full of cash. And now you're running with something that's probably the last piece of the puzzle." Linda's fingers tightened around the bag. "This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," Jake snapped. "Your nonsense nearly got me arrested, got my generator stolen, and ruined half this neighborhood's peace. Whatever you're mixed up in, I'm not letting you drag anyone else down with you." Linda's expression hardened, and without warning, she shoved past him and bolted toward her car. Jake lunged, grabbing the bag strap just before she could toss it inside. They struggled for control, both yanking violently. In the chaos, the bag tore open, spilling its contents across the driveway. Stacks of cash tumbled out, along with a sleek black tablet loaded with a list of coded messages. Among the scattered items was a key, an old-fashioned iron key with a worn leather tag marked Storage Unit 16. Linda froze in horror. "You shouldn't have seen that," she whispered. "Oh no," Jake said breathlessly. "I think I should have seen all of it." Before Linda could react, Jake snatched up the key and bolted down the street. Behind him, Linda shouted curses, but she wasn't fast enough to catch him. Heart pounding, Jake sprinted to his house, locked the door, and collapsed against it, the key still clenched tightly in his hand. Minutes later, he called the FBI. 2 agents arrived in unmarked cars, and Jake wasted no time showing them the key and explaining what happened. The agents exchanged serious glances. "That's what we've been looking for," one of them muttered. "It's linked to a storage facility about 10 miles from here. We believe the ringleaders have been using it to stash weapons." "You mean Linda's been sitting on this the whole time?" Jake asked in disbelief. "Unknowingly," the agent said grimly. "We suspect she's just been manipulated. Someone's been feeding her information, using her obsession with HOA records to quietly move information and cash. We've been trying to trace the physical evidence. This key was critical." "Great," Jake said, wiping his forehead. "So what now?" The agent's face hardened. "Now we deal with Linda." By the time Jake and the agents returned to Linda's house, her car was gone. She'd vanished. The FBI scrambled to trace her phone, but Jake had a better idea. "She's going to the storage unit," he said. "She knows that's where the real heat is." Sure enough, by the time they reached the storage facility, Linda's car was parked near the back of the lot. Jake stayed behind while the agents moved in. From his position behind a dumpster, Jake watched as the agents closed in on Linda just as she unlocked the storage unit. Linda shrieked as they grabbed her, but the FBI agents weren't the only ones on her trail. A shadowy figure stepped from the shadows, a tall man in a dark jacket, cold and intimidating. Jake realized too late that this was someone Linda had been working for, knowingly or not. And the man wasn't about to let her get away. The man lunged toward the agents, drawing a weapon. Jake didn't think, just acted. He grabbed a metal trash can lid and hurled it like a frisbee, striking the man's arm just before he could fire. The weapon clattered to the pavement, and within seconds, the agents had the man pinned face down on the asphalt. Linda stood frozen, pale and speechless. When the agents opened the storage unit, they found exactly what they feared: crates of firearms, fake IDs, and stacks of counterfeit cash. It was a criminal gold mine, and Linda had been caught red-handed in the middle of it. "I didn't know," Linda sputtered, her voice high and frantic. "I was just following instructions. I thought I was just keeping track of residents. I didn't know what those numbers meant." The agents barely acknowledged her. Jake, still breathing hard, finally stepped forward. "You played yourself, Linda," he said. "All that time spent controlling people, and you ended up letting the wrong people control you." Linda glared at him, but said nothing as the agents hauled her into their car. Jake couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Linda had spent years making his life miserable, yet in the end, her obsession with power had dragged her into something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. That night, Jake returned home feeling exhausted yet victorious. He sat on his porch with a cold beer, staring at the dim glow of the FBI's final van pulling away. The chaos was finally over, so he thought. A few minutes later, a sleek black car rolled quietly down the street. It parked across from his house, and the silhouette of someone unfamiliar appeared behind the wheel. Jake narrowed his eyes. Whatever this was, he had a feeling things weren't quite finished yet. Jake sat on his porch the morning after Linda's arrest, sipping his coffee and staring at the spot where her car had once been. The morning felt unusually calm. No barking HOA orders. No surprise visits from Linda demanding he trim his lawn a quarter-inch shorter. The silence should have felt peaceful, but instead, it felt like the uneasy calm before a storm. The black car from the night before still lingered down the block, parked just far enough away to avoid suspicion, but close enough that Jake knew someone was watching. Later that day, Jake decided to confront the car directly. He walked down the street, heart pounding, rehearsing what he might say. As he neared the vehicle, the driver's side window rolled down, revealing a man in his 40s, clean-shaven, with sharp eyes and a crisp suit. He was FBI, Jake could tell that much. "You looking for something?" Jake asked. The man smiled in a way that felt colder than friendly. "Just keeping an eye on things," he said calmly. "Seems like there's been a lot of excitement around here lately." "Yeah, thanks to Linda," Jake muttered. "She's locked up now, so whatever you're looking for isn't here." "Maybe," the man said, shrugging. "But maybe not. You see, people like Linda, they get involved in things without realizing how deep they've gotten. Sometimes they leave loose ends behind." "Loose ends," Jake repeated. The man's smile widened. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just stay out of things, and you won't have any problems." Jake didn't like the sound of that. The man drove away a moment later, and Jake stood frozen in place, feeling like he'd just been warned or threatened. By the time night fell, Jake had double-checked that every lock on his doors and windows was secure. He even moved his old generator back to the garage, half joking to himself that Linda's meddling had at least made him realize he could never be too careful. Despite the tension in his chest, exhaustion eventually won, and Jake drifted off to sleep. He woke at 2 a.m. to the faint sound of footsteps outside his window. His stomach tightened, and for a moment, he wondered if he'd imagined it. Then came a metallic clink sound of someone trying to jimmy his back door lock. Heart pounding, Jake grabbed the heavy flashlight from his nightstand and crept to the kitchen. Through the window, he saw the silhouette of a figure dressed in dark clothes, crouched near the door. Whoever they were seconds away from breaking in. Without thinking, Jake flicked on the porch light, grabbed a frying pan from the counter, and slammed it against the window to startle the intruder. The figure bolted into the darkness. Shaking with adrenaline, Jake called the FBI agent he'd been in contact with before. Within 20 minutes, 2 agents were at his door, checking the perimeter and examining the lock. "They're looking for something," one of the agents muttered after hearing Jake's story. "Probably something Linda didn't even realize she was holding on to." "Like what?" Jake asked. The agent's face hardened. "We've been investigating this network for months. Illegal arms dealers, money laundering, fake identities. They're careful, but Linda's ridiculous obsession with paperwork and records gave them a convenient cover. If they think Linda hid something for them, something important, they'll go through this entire neighborhood to find it." The agent's words lingered long after they left. Jake couldn't sleep. If the people Linda had knowingly worked with believed she still had something valuable, they weren't going to stop with a break-in. Jake decided he needed to figure out what they were looking for before they did. The next morning, Jake walked down to Linda's house, which still sat empty and quiet. FBI tape blocked the door, but the side gate hung slightly ajar. Linda's garage, where she'd once smugly stashed his stolen generator, hadn't been fully secured. Jake took one last look around before slipping inside. Linda's garage was still cluttered with junk piles of HOA newsletters, cardboard boxes filled with folders, and plastic storage bins filled with everything from gardening gloves to old photo albums. Jake dug through the mess, unsure what he was even looking for. Just as he was about to give up, he found something strange: a worn leather-bound notebook tucked inside a box of old Christmas decorations. Jake flipped it open. The pages were filled with lists of numbers, addresses, and what appeared to be coded messages. It didn't look like Linda's handwriting. The script was rushed, almost messy. Whatever this was, it had clearly been tucked away as if someone had intended to come back for it. Jake quickly snapped a few photos of the pages with his phone and returned the book to its hiding place. That evening, he shared the photos with the FBI agent, who immediately recognized the numbers as coded coordinates: drop points, storage facilities, and safe houses tied to the criminal network they'd been investigating. The notebook was likely the final link in their case, enough to connect the remaining suspects to their operations. Later that night, the FBI raided the storage units Linda had unknowingly helped conceal. Inside, they found weapons caches, counterfeit currency, and forged IDs. The final piece of the operation had finally unraveled. A week later, Jake sat comfortably on his porch, beer in hand, savoring the rare peace in his neighborhood. Linda's resignation as HOA president had been swift, and a new president, a friendly retiree named Susan, had already been voted in. The HOA, shaken by Linda's destructive reign, had even voted to allow Jake to keep his generator without further complaint. The best part, though, was seeing Linda sentenced to community service. As Jake drove past the elementary school one morning, he spotted her standing at the crosswalk in an obnoxiously bright orange vest, gripping a stop sign with a defeated look on her face. Jake rolled down his window and gave her a cheerful wave. "Need a generator?" he called out with a grin. Linda's glare could have melted steel. Later that evening, Jake received an unexpected visit toward the same FBI agent who had been involved in the investigation. The agent handed Jake an envelope, which turned out to be a thank you note and a gift card for a local steakhouse. "You really saved us some trouble," the agent said. "That notebook was the key to wrapping this thing up. We'd probably still be chasing leads if you hadn't found it." "Happy to help," Jake said with a smile. "Just make sure you guys stick around in case Linda tries to take over the neighborhood barbecue committee or something." The agent chuckled, shaking Jake's hand before heading back to his car. As the agent drove off, Jake leaned back in his chair, breathing a satisfied sigh. The chaos was finally over, and for once, the neighborhood felt like a place where people could actually relax. Of course, knowing Linda, Jake suspected it wouldn't be long before she found some new way to stir up trouble. But as he sat there in the warm glow of his porch light, Jake decided that whatever came next, he'd be ready for it. After all, surviving Linda Harper had taught him one thing. Sometimes, you don't just fight back, sometimes, you win. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.